I got a lot of problems with you people, and now you're going to hear about it. Just kidding. You people have a lot of problems with the Golden State Warriors this offseason. We're going to talk about it. Up first, Steve Kerr. Is he doing a good enough job coaching this team? We'll break it all down now on Locked On Warriors.
You are Locked On Warriors, your daily Golden State Warriors podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Warriors your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Yes, you heard that right. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Thanks so much for being here. I am your host, Kylen Mills, a play-by-play broadcaster, host with the Big Ten Network, NBC Sports Bay Area, and many more. And I am joined by, happy today to have Greg Silver with us, KNBR producer, host, another man of many hats, play-by-play broadcaster, and much more. Greg, appreciate you being here. Really quick, on today's show, we are going to break down analytically, is Steve Kerr doing a good enough job, or is he the problem with the Golden State Warriors? I asked you to share your grievances with me about this team, and that was one of the number one comments I continue to get: fire Steve Kerr. So let's realistically look at it. Let's take an objective eye to this thing. If we have time at the end, we're going to touch on OG Anunoby as well. But first, we're really going to dive into Steve Kerr. And Greg, I'm going to give a couple criteria to you to grade Steve Kerr on, where you'd put him. But I want to start with just your overall take on last season. How would you say that Steve Kerr did in coaching this team through 2023, 2024, based on the roster that was at his disposal?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Kylen. It's great to be here. I can't believe I get to take part in the Seinfeld-themed episode. I know I'm young, but I am a Seinfeld head, and we're almost at the halfway point in the calendar year between Festivus. It's going to be June 23rd, so June 18th, yes. Close enough. This is the perfect off-season theme to do. And yeah, look, I'm not surprised that Steve Kerr came up a lot in the airing of the grievances, just given the theme of a lot of the episodes of the last couple of years on this program. I might upset some people with this. Steve Kerr has not done an A+ job. He's also not that high on my list of grievances for the past couple of years. Now, I'll get this out of the way because some of you watching or listening might know me and know this about me, and some of you might not. And that's that I do know the Kerr family well. I love them very much as people. They're awesome. But the NBA is a business. I work in a professional space, and I don't take anything personally when people are giving criticism out, because that just goes for anybody in the world of sports. And I think this is where I get a little fatigued, though, Kylen. And it's that a lot of the Steve Kerr noise and kind of spiral that seems to go around really seems to happen in the internet or in outside spaces. And what I mean by that is, like, for me, when I am within the building or talking with people that are in the building a lot, there's really not a lot of Steve Kerr is a problem kind of buzz. And it's really not even like, we love him and he changed the culture of this team, but, we're kind of concerned he doesn't have it anymore. We don't think that, he can really handle the locker room. And, like, I'm not getting a lot of that in sort of the internal NBA and Warriors world. And I think for that reason, I get a little bit of fatigue. Now, again, that doesn't bar him from any kind of criticism. The Warriors have the highest of high standards when they've won 4 championships over an 8-year span. And they're trying to get everything they can out of this dynasty and get maybe one more run out of this Hall of Fame core. So I'm glad we get to talk about it. I do think there are grievances that are higher than Steve Kerr on my list. I don't know if you want me to share them now or later, but yeah, but that's kind of my opening thoughts.
Hold on. Let me play the clip really quick. So if you're not a Seinfeld fan, you're going to have to Google this, but this is all part of Festivus. Festivus for the rest of us was a holiday that was brought into fruition by Costanza's dad. I can't remember what his first name is. Frank Costanza. Say, obviously, George is the main character. Frank Costanza. And let me just play a quick clip here.
The tradition of Festivus begins with the airing of grievances. I got a lot of problems with you people. Now, you're going to hear about it.
So that's basically the impetus of Festivus. A big part of the tradition is the airing of the grievances as they sit down to a traditional dinner. It is followed by feats of strength that involves wrestling, the head of household. There's also a decorated aluminum pole. I'm not exactly sure how that fits into the mix, but that is what led to this conversation. Me asking you, the folks at home, and our viewers and listeners to share what your grievances are. But sure, Greg, you know what? While we're at it, we're airing the grievances. What are your bigger grievances than Steve Kerr?
I would say on the top of the list, you probably have the unavailability and inconsistency of Andrew Wiggins being someone that's going to be 29 this next season, kind of this bridge player that was supposed to keep things going while the star Hall of Fame core got older. Weirdly, Wiggins, for whatever personal reasons he may have going on, and, we don't know the extent of that, and I am always taking the empathy first approach with him. But the bottom line is, it's fair that the Warriors might be looking to move off of him. They gave him a big contract, and he hasn't lived up to it on the court, whether he's been there or, not been there at all. And I think that as the 29-year-old who's your best perimeter defender, a great two-way player throughout the 2022 season, and especially in that postseason, it's kind of a big deal when he's not showing up, because now you have a team of a bunch of aging guys, and on the other end of it, a team of guys that are maybe a little bit too young and not quite ready. So that's number one. Two, I think, would be everything that Draymond Green has done on the negative side over the last couple of seasons. You win a championship. We're not going to make this podcast a he punched Jordan Poole podcast, but that's made Jordan Poole's play suffer. He's not on the team anymore. They chose to stay with Draymond and give him an extension, and then he got suspended more times. And when he is focused and he plays, he still is elite defensively and anchors the defense and is huge for the younger players like a Trace Jackson-Davis, who came along nicely in the second half of the season. But when you're killing the team chemistry and you're not fully available there, and Steph Curry doesn't have the defensive capabilities that you do, that kind of shoots your season in the foot. You won 46 games this year, but you didn't even sniff the playoffs because you could have very well gotten to 50 and that would have changed everything, but it didn't. You didn't even get to the 8-9 play-in game. So that's one. Another one I think I would say is just circumstantial, just in terms of the age, and along with that, Klay Thompson getting a little bit older, not being the player he used to be. He can't defend in the way he did pre-injuries. He's not consistent enough, Kylen, to be your second option, like that you can rely on a given night, although he does have some capabilities to light it up still. And so, just some of it's circumstantial and trying to keep sustained greatness over a decade plus. And then after that, I probably start getting into roster construction and how players are used and lineup and everything that. So I do want to talk about Steve Kerr, and I'm glad that this is the subject of our episode, but I think there's just a lot of things. And sometimes we as sports fans, not just of the Warriors, but in general, can really fixate on the same 1 to 2 storylines when, to me, it's sort of a cesspool of different factors that are coming together here.
I think you put it perfectly in that it's easy to really just narrow-mindedly look at and focus on one issue. And I do think it's a contributing factor. And like you said, I do think Steve Kerr has to be open to criticism. He plays a part, but there have been a number of factors. I love the ones that you pointed out because honestly, both Draymond Green and Andrew Wiggins weren't at the top of my list. Draymond's definitely up there, but my number one grievance is roster construction. It's another one that came up a lot in the comments, but I think the team needs to get bigger or they need to get younger. And I think it needed to happen sooner after the 2022 championship run. Like, I think moving forward, there had to be a realization that the Warriors cannot continue to play this small ball with the key pieces of that small ball lineup getting so much older. And so I think after the 2022-23 season, I would have liked to see changes made. This past trade deadline, I was hoping they would bring in a big, and it still didn't happen. So to me, I think there also has to be acknowledgement of the roster that Steve Kerr is working with. in that you have older players, you have players that are slower. This was the third oldest team in the NBA, and that's just by rosters top to bottom. And then you look at the older players that are actually being used. The Warriors' three oldest players are the three leaders in minutes in Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, and Steph Curry. And then the actual oldest player, Chris Paul, was fifth or sixth in minutes. But still, you're looking at mid-30s to late 30s players who are taking on a majority of the load, when I just don't think that's realistic. So to me, that's the number one grievance. But Steve Kerr's on my list. He's not at the top of my list, but we're going to get into exactly why some of you folks may have issues with him. And then let's look at both sides of the issues. And then we'll let you, Greg, be the judge, jury, and executioner, you who are listening, watching at home, and make the decision. Is this really the biggest issue with this Warriors team right now? Well, you know what? I don't know about you. I'm already ready for the NBA season to get back in full swing, because one day of watching the Boston Celtics celebrate is one day too many. But the summertime does mean baseball, the WNBA, the Olympics coming up in a month. And you can bet on all of those sports, make them a little bit more interesting while you wait for the Warriors to get back in action on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. And here I've got a play that I want to throw out for you guys right now. Aaron Judge, over 52.5 homers on the season. Judge is hitting 2+ per week. Got off to a slower start to the season, but in 2 seasons, he played more than 160 games. He hit 62 and 52. If he stays healthy, this is a number you can bet on. It's -110 right now. So there you go. I think that's a good play. And the place to do that is to go on over to FanDuel. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from the finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park if you place a $5 bet that wins. So once again, those bonus dollars go a long way. $200. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back to the topic at hand, which is Steve Kerr. That's where we got to go from here. We both aired some of our biggest grievances. And let's dive into a couple of criteria that I want to look at to determine what kind of job is Steve Kerr actually doing. And I want to mention this, I don't want to just evaluate him on this past season or the season prior. Like, let's look at the entire body of work. Steve Kerr has now been a head coach with the Warriors for a decade. Officially, he was hired in May of 2014. And I feel like it's easy to have recency bias, but looking back at what Steve Kerr did, bringing all these young pieces together, like back at the beginning of Steph Curry and Draymond Green's career, I do think that needs to be acknowledged as we're going down this list. So I want to start with, there's 3 things I want to look at: in-game coaching, preparation, and then youth development, developing the young talent. Let's start with in-game coaching. The knowledge of the X's and O's, instilling a system and then being able to adapt it as the game goes on, making adjustments, then playing the right players at the right times. I'll really quickly give my grade for in-game coaching is going to be a C. I think that people immediately want to jump on this because they've been unhappy with some of the rotations recently and the amount of run the young players have been getting. But here's my devil's advocate side to this. Steve Kerr has been put in a tough position where this organization is expected to win now, and they haven't been winning. So you look at these last 2 regular seasons, and he's being told or called on by the fans to give these young players a longer leash. And I agree. I think he should have. But at the same time, there's a pressure to win, and they have to win now. And who are the players that he trusts? Who are the players that have the track record of winning a championship just back in 2022? And that's the older players. That's the vets. Those are the guys who he's had that long-term relationship with. And oh yeah, they've won 4 rings together. So I do understand the dilemma that he's in needing to give these young players a longer leash. But at the same time, this team has to win now. And he feels more comfortable in those key situations, turning to the vets that already have a history of success in the NBA. But I want to hear from you. In-game coaching, X's and O's, making adjustments, and usage in minutes of different players in terms of the rotation. How would you evaluate the job Steve Kerr has done?
I was muted.
We love technology. You're all good.
We love technology. FanDuel had me all quieted down, and now I'm back. But I think for the first 6-7 years, it was an A+ when you look at the playoffs and some of the pickles they got themselves out of. But I don't want to speak too much to the past because this is a different team. This is kind of the final chapter here of what is this dynasty and if they have anything left in there. So I'll kind of focus more on the recent. I want to go with a B. And I think that my reasoning is both reason for praise and criticism, which is that I actually think when you look at February onward, it got to a point where the roster sort of knew their role. Like, it wasn't a great team. You really only had one star. He got fatigued late in the year, but everyone was kind of more comfortable in their role. Now, the flip side to that, and where I will say Steve Kerr has to do better next year, is he's got to adapt quicker. He has to learn to adapt quicker to the point where the Warriors cannot be in this, we're kind of figuring out our guys halfway through the season. And some of those circumstances were out of coaching control, like Draymond Green and the suspension. That changes your entire defense. And that's an area where I'm going to be a little bit more lenient on the coaching side of things. But heading into next year, assuming things go to plan in terms of health and suspensions and all that, people have to know their roles in October and November, and maybe in December, you're starting to really iron it out. But we can't be at the All-Star break like, I think this team's going to figure it out and make a run. I thought they actually adjusted okay with all the turmoil that was going on, and I don't think that the in-game coaching was the biggest problem of the season. I would say maybe late game lineup management and execution could be a problem at times, but it was also hard when there was a lot of inconsistencies, whether that be youth, whether that be your Klay Thompsons and what he was going through. So, I don't see it as a thing that was great because they blew a lot of games that they should have won. But again, it wasn't like an area where I'm looking at and narrowing in saying, wow, that was a bomb.
Yeah, I'm with you all the way on a lot of those points. And I do want to, like I said, I agree with you. You don't want to focus too much on the past, but looking at the entire tenure of Steve Kerr's time with the Warriors, like, he has been able to make adjustments, whether it be in game or game to game. You go back to how the death lineup initially came to be back in 2015, and that's because he saw what was happening in the series, saw the way it was going, and decided to make a change, inserting Andre Iguodala into the 3 spot and then letting go of that traditional 1 through 5 lineup. Like, that's Steve Kerr. There was some, conversations with assistants that also played a factor, but still, like, I think when you look back at the job he's done, and you pointed out years like 1 through 6, 7, there have been times where he has made adjustments. And I do think he deserves credit also for the system that he brought in that works so well with the Warriors. I think it's easy to forget, going back to when Mark Jackson was leading this team, I thought Mark Jackson did a really good job of working with the young players, instilling confidence in them. You hear Steph Curry still give him a lot of credit for bringing him along as a rookie. But at the same time, that system was too stagnant. It didn't work. You got to keep the ball moving. And that's where Steve Kerr coming in, X's and O's wise, and bringing in this motion offense that relies on so much ball movement and keeping the ball moving and all the different cutting and screening, double screens that are happening at the same time. All of that is what allowed the Warriors to unlock all of those championship seasons. Yes, I think it's easy to look at how great his teams were, but look at the Warriors under Mark Jackson when they were younger to what Steve Kerr was able to bring out in them. And I think a lot of that's the system that he brought in, and he deserves some credit for the X's and O's that led to the motion offense. I know he took some things from Phil Jackson and some pieces from his playbook, but that helped unlock Klay Thompson, some of the double screens, the different actions that you see happening on pick and rolls where there's another screen happening somewhere away from the ball, allow him to get open. You look at some of the dribble handoffs, has helped a lot of the shooters unlock their games. I just think that he deserves credit for finding a system that works with his current core. However, now the core is aging out. It's time for it to adapt. And I think that's the point that we're at. So I don't think that he's necessarily a bad coach in terms of not seeing the X's and O's, but I do think this is an important inflection point, both for the Warriors and in his career, where the system has to adapt to the players that they have, who's available, and what their realistic strengths are. And for example, if Klay Thompson isn't consistently producing and they don't have the best backcourt in the NBA and Steph Curry and Klay Thompson anymore, what's the plan B? What are the other ways that you can score? Well, we're still really small, and we have a front court that's offensively deficient in Kevon Looney and Draymond Green. We could get away with that before. We didn't necessarily need them to score before, but now can we figure out a different way to get more production from the front court, whether that be roster pieces or, like I said, or X's and O's? Are there some different things they can be trying? I think, yes, I would love to see more high ball screens with Jonathan Kuminga rolling. I think that even Steph Curry getting the ball more on high ball screens was something that I wanted to see more of, especially when they go up against, like, I keep going back to the semifinal series against the Lakers last year, where I feel like that was a game changer when they put Draymond Green on Anthony Davis and they started being able to pull him out from under the paint. And that was something that helped them deal with some of the size disadvantage inside. But I just think that now the system has to evolve with what's available. But I do think that he has it. Like, I think that Steve Kerr has to be given credit for the way that he has been able to create a system that best utilizes the players that have been available for the last decade. But now it has to change. And that also goes into changing the players that are getting key minutes at key times. I think it all rolls together. The bottom line is it has to evolve. Now, can Steve Kerr evolve? I think this is an important inflection point in his career. I think it's easy to point the finger and say it's all him. I don't think it's all him, but I do think that this is going to be key for him to figure out how do we evolve this team into the next era, because the time is now. We're done with the past. To me, this, I hate to say the dynasty, the core, whatever, but like, it's run its course. We're talking about Klay Thompson going out the door, and that's a very, very real possibility. The big three being broken up. So what's next? Steve Kerr has to be the driver of that cart and figuring out, how do we now adjust the game plan? How do we adjust the X's and O's? How do we adjust in game? And how do we put the right pieces in the right positions to help this team win? Sorry, that was a long rant.
No, it was a very intelligent rant that I mostly agree with too. I mean, we'll get to the next item, but I don't think in-game adjustments has been much of a problem when you look at how the Warriors have kind of worn teams down. And I know they blew a lot of leads this year, and that's going to stick with people and sting, but they were that team that you couldn't put away and could never shut the door on for years. Yes, they had a lot of talent, but the way they moved the ball and had so many different threats around the perimeter, and Draymond Green being the unique offensive piece, not necessarily as a scorer, but the brilliant basketball mind that could set things up and make plays. I mean, the way that they were all able to get on the same page was remarkable. And we just crowned our 6th NBA champion in 6 different years last night. The Warriors got 4 and 8. Like, it's really, really hard to stay that good for that long.
100%. So we've got some more criteria to get into on this topic coming up. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Okay, Greg, just making sure you're unmuted. Yeah, we don't want you muted. All right, he's back. Okay, so moving along. So let's move on to the next point. And I actually am going to roll this into the second criteria, because I do think some of the using the right players at the right times overlaps into developing the youth. Because that is one area that I had a big issue with, was the utilization of the young players and the certain minutes and the way that they work those rotations. Like, there were times where Corey Joseph was running the point in the fourth quarter. And I'm like, why? Put in any one of the young players. At that time, like I said, I remember specifically a couple times where Pods was on the bench. Moses Moody was on the bench. Even Kuminga was on the bench. I don't care who it is. Figure out a different lineup, but I don't want Corey Joseph on the court in the fourth quarter. I'm sorry. But I think it rolls into some of, how do you use the young players to the best of their abilities to help the team win, but also giving them confidence, helping them develop, continuing to grow them. And it's a delicate balance. So it's a tough task to ask. You don't look back at the history of the NBA and see teams winning championships while also developing a massive number of guys who are 22 and under. And prior to the Warriors trading James Wiseman, like, that's the situation they were in, where they had 5-6 players who were 22 and under, including Jordan Poole. I think Jordan Poole was right around 23 at the time. I think it was 6 guys who were like 23 and under. That is very difficult to have that number of youngsters and then have these veterans and no in between. But from your eyes, what do you think needs to change? What have you liked about the way Steve Kerr has worked with the young pieces the organization has brought in the last several years?
This could be such a delicate topic when you go on podcasts or radio shows. So I'm glad we can hash it out a little bit. I mean, here's the thing. I'm glad you bring up the NBA history element of it because Colin Cowherd, I listen to him talk about football primarily, but occasionally see things that he says about basketball and particularly the Warriors. And he had a pretty good point when it comes to the history of dynasties in sports in general, and especially basketball, which is older players, when you get to a certain level of winning and Hall of Fame status, don't have the patience and wherewithal to wait around for someone who's 21 years old to come along and figure it out. It's always a different level of IQ. Yes, the athleticism's there. People age differently, but mentally the game, it's really hard to get on the same page. And I think that Steve Kerr is much more aligned with the older core that he started this whole run with, understandably, when he took over as a coach, than he might be the younger pieces. Now, I don't think that they're incapable of developing youth, and you can't really say that when you hit on both draft picks. You had an all-NBA rookie first team with the 19th pick of the draft, 18th, 19th?
19th,
and then the 57th pick of the draft became a starter late in the year, and they were good. I think that, truthfully, Kylen, and again, might rile up some people with this one, I think people really just narrow in on one name, and it's Jonathan Kuminga and the whole I've lost faith in Steve Kerr thing, which they seem to recover from okay in the second half of the season. Because Jonathan Kuminga has come into the league at such a young age and had these signs of being a superstar level potential talent, but hasn't always done things consistently enough to get minutes. And I'm not saying he shouldn't get minutes. He should continue to get more minutes and grow as a player. But it's not that just because he's had the journey he's had in the league doesn't mean that young players can't be developed. By the way, I'm on the same page as a lot of people with Moses Moody. I want to see him either be a part of the rotation this year or they find a different situation from him. I don't think that's fair to Moody if they kind of just drag him along, pull him back and forth. But young players have come into the system and done very well in support of the older players. It's just that not every draft pick hits, James Wiseman, or they're not the focal point of the team. Like Jordan Poole was kind of a rare case in that he was an essential part of a championship team, being the at times third best offensive player or second best offensive player in the game at some points, but not for an entire playoff run. So the youth development thing drives me a little crazy. I get the criticisms and everything, but it's hard to develop youth when you're running a dynasty. I mean, you grew up with the 90s Bulls, Kylen. I don't think you were hearing about a lot of these young Bulls in the late 90s who needed to get their share of minutes and they were going to take the torch from Jordan and win a bunch of championships.
Steve Kerr was the only young Bull that was in the mix at the time.
And we've come full circle.
Yeah, exactly. And here we are. 100%. No, and I think that to me was the issue I want to point out off the top is the fact that winning championships doesn't happen with a bunch of rookies and second-year players on a roster playing key roles. It just doesn't. However, I'm going to go a little bit of a different direction than you. When I look back to his development of Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, because again, I know Mark Jackson started their career with them, but they were all still very young and really blossomed under Steve Kerr. You look at Draymond Green, he didn't have a big role for the Warriors when he first came in under Mark Jackson in his system. And he came to be what he is, a defensive player of the year, all defensive team selection under Steve Kerr. I think he deserves an A for what he did with the big three and some of the other young pieces who he brought together. And I keep pointing out the system, but I think right now I would give him a D. I would give him a D for the last couple of years. And here's why. First of all, the usage of Jonathan Kuminga. You pointed it out. I know it made headlines, but at the end of the day, it has to be addressed. His usage of Jonathan Kuminga, I don't think complements a young player developing. You look at the game against the Denver Nuggets. Jonathan Kuminga 16, 17 points, 5 for 7 from the floor, had like 4 boards, 4 assists, doesn't play the fourth quarter. And that's where a lot of this issue stems from. But I do think that's just a microcosm of a lot of what's happened, where Jonathan Kuminga flat out said, like, there's times where I come out and I don't know what I did. Like, why did I come out? Why am I getting benched? And I think those kinds of questions are what hurt the confidence of a young player. And that's where there has to be consistency, to me, in the way that you're being utilized, or at least some level of consistency. And there has to be communication. And Steve Kerr flat out addressed it as well after the fact, and after some of that situation boiled over, said, hey, he came into my office. We had a great chat. We really feel like we've been able to get through what this was that we're dealing with and figure out why the way things are the way they are. But to me, you're the head coach. You should be having that conversation before the player has to come to you. And Steve Kerr is like, well, I'm the most open coach in the league. I have an open door. But at the same time, like, that's your job. You know what goes on in a young player's mind. You were once there. You should be addressing with him. Why did he come out in that fourth quarter? Or why have his minutes been inconsistent? Hey, it wasn't anything to do with you. I felt like Andrew Wiggins was playing really well and XYZ didn't want to put you in at the 4 spot. I don't know, whatever. But I also think that impetus is on the coach to initiate those conversations, knowing what young players are going through, rather than them wondering behind the scenes what's going on. It affects their confidence, their ability to develop consistency in their play, and then expecting them to come to you and want to address those things. So that's why I'm giving him a D for now. Moses Moody, the other big part of that, the DNPs, inconsistent minutes throughout the season. I think he's continued to show that he's ready for the moment. He's ready for a bigger role, but it hasn't come yet. I think, like I said, I say all of this while still acknowledging all the things that we've said about how difficult it is to try to give these young players a bigger role, or the role that they want, while also trying to win a title. But then again, I look at Brandon Pajemski and I'm like, I loved seeing Brandon Pajemski get more minutes as the season went on. I thought it was great. I wanted to see Trace Jackson Davis get more minutes. I loved when he was in there. He adds a different element to the Warriors, a vertical threat. I mean, yes, you've got JK who's a vertical threat, but a little more athleticism down low than what you've got with the Kevon Looney, who could be a threat in the pick and roll. So I loved seeing TJD and wanted to see more of him. So I don't want to say that he completely botched everything, but I think specifically with JK and Moody, the best is yet to come with them. I think they could reach their potential, but they're not there. And I do think that Steve Kerr has played a role these last 2 years in the way he's used them or not used them. There's been tons of inconsistencies. And then based on what came out from that JK conversation, it doesn't seem to me like there's enough communication between the coaching staff and those young players about why things are the way they are. And so that's my big issue, or biggest issue with it as well, is there has to be an open line of communication that to me falls on the coach to help those players maintain confidence.
Yeah, and that's totally fair, Kylen, to say that communication's got to be there, and it's on the onus of the head of the staff to communicate with a 21-year-old, and probably not the other way around. Yeah. There was a Kuminga quote a couple of months after that Denver game, which maybe slipped through the cracks for some people, but JD, John Dickinson, my co-host and host that I work for,
counterpart,
we really loved this quote, which was Kuminga in a post game saying, I'm not going to go out there and do things that I'm not supposed to do and expect to play 30 minutes. And I really loved hearing him say that, because maybe it sort of illustrated that, yeah, wasn't always perfect on the coaching end, but wasn't always perfect on his end. And maybe he wasn't always getting it to click in terms of playing team defense and doing things that was going to get the coaching staff's trust. And I think that when you have a locked in kind of Jonathan Kuminga who is doing more winning plays in team basketball, in addition to scoring inside and using his athleticism, then you have no right to take him out of the starting lineup or give him a tight leash when he makes one mistake, kind of thing. And I think there were games in the second half of the season where he got more freedom, like the win against Phoenix the night before the Super Bowl was a big one. He was really key down the stretch, and I thought he showed some great maturity that game too. So yes, that is something that I do think needs to be there from the start of this year. And I guess with Kuminga, what I'll end it on is that I love the kid. I think he's got the potential to make another big jump, but sometimes the cloud of just he can only do good things out there and anything that goes wrong is on the fault of somebody else. I just think it's a little bit full of it for me when you look at a 21-year-old basketball player.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I can't believe the show has already come to an end, Greg, because this has been fantastic and it has flown by. My last comment about the whole Steve Kerr situation, I think it is too early to fire Steve Kerr. I think looking around the league, I think it's easy to say, fire Steve Kerr. Okay, who's going to come in and be so much better than Steve Kerr, who is, and a Hall
JJ
of Famer, multi-time, champion, both as a player and as a coach. So I think it's like easy to point the finger, but I do think that with his track record, he deserves more time. And I think this is an important point. I think that there has to be I think there has to be adjustments. I think he has to evolve coming into this next season, because at the end of the day, the new era is here. And is Steve Kerr going to be the one who leads us into that new era, or is he going to die with the old Warriors as they all go out to pasture? I think we're at an inflection point where it's like, yeah, he has to adapt the system to the players he has available. He has to start trusting the young guys. And I think this is going to be a critical year to figuring out whether or not that's going to happen and whether or not he is the right person to lead this organization into the next era. I think that calling to fire him right now is premature.
Yeah, and I would just say that if you were to get rid of Steve Kerr and run a team with Steph, Draymond, and then Podziemski, Trace Jackson Davis, Moses Moody, Jonathan Kuminga, like, some of you might disagree, but the reality is you're kind of beginning the rebuild at that point. And maybe Steph Curry and Draymond are okay with that at this stage in their career, but that's kind of up to them on a decision they want to make. And, if they wanted him out as a coach, that would have been done well before this offseason. So I think it's probably going to be, they got to be prepared going into next year, make some roster tweaks, and they can't wait till February to figure out, like I said.
Absolutely. Well, Greg, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Some really good dialogue. I like seeing some different points, because you made some different points that I totally agree with, and I see your side on. And I want to mention lots of respect for Steve Kerr. This was not meant to be a Steve Kerr roast. I like him as a person as well. He is always great to work with from a media perspective. So I want to give a shout out to him for that. I also appreciate his willingness to speak on issues that are near and dear to him. I know that's a little bit polarizing among sports fans, but I personally respect it. Appreciate the respect that he shows us journalists, appreciate the championships he's brought to the organization, but I do think it's fair to have the discussion. What is Steve Kerr going to do to move this organization forward now into the next era? And we'll get to see, but a lot of changes could be coming to the roster that will also be very telling in what's to come next. Now, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Greg, thank you so much. It has been so much fun. We're going to have to do it again. It's been that much fun.
Thank you, Kylen. And Steve, if you're somehow listening to this, just know that I will roast you way worse in person.
And we love that. It's a true friend and a colleague who can roast you in person. Have a great day or night, everyone.
Thank you.
Woo!